I asked you who killed Tupac, who would you say?
Orlando Anderson.
He wasn't a trigger man, was he? Because have anybody been arrested? The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know?
Suge Knight has spoken on the shooting incident of Tupac Shakur ever since it had taken place, being in 1996. The day before Biggie Smalls was murdered, being on March 9th, 1997, America's Most Wanted aired a special report on Tupac Shakur where they had interviewed Suge Knight. When they asked Suge about who killed Tupac, he claimed that the show had already figured it out, with the show then referencing to an affidavit which claimed Crip gang member Orlando Anderson allegedly had been the shooter. Suge Knight, in a prison interview released in November of 2020, claimed Orlando Anderson was not the shooter and named different people who he believed was involved in the crime. In this video, we're going to take a look into Suge Knight's claims spanning over 26 years, being about Tupac's death and who he believes the shooter may have been.
We asked Knight, who killed Tupac? He says America's Most Wanted has already revealed the answer to that question.
And you guys asking questions that you guys already know the answer to.
Just 7 hours before Biggie Smalls was murdered, being just past midnight on March 9th, 1997, America's Most Wanted had aired at 9 PM Eastern Time, doing a special report on the murder case of Tupac Shakur. The show featured Suge Knight, who was sentenced to 9 years in prison, being a week prior due to a probation violation after CCTV footage had showed him being involved in an attack, being on a Crip gang member just 3 hours before Tupac was fatally shot. America's Most Wanted got an exclusive interview with Suge Knight before going to prison, where they had asked him about Tupac's killer. Suge Knight responded by claiming that the show had already revealed the answer. America's Most Wanted obtained an affidavit in February of 1997, which claimed confidential informants had identified Orlando Anderson as being the triggerman.
Confidential informants have identified this man, Orlando Anderson, as Tupac's killer.
This ties into the Crip theory of the Southside Compton Crips being behind the murder, being in retaliation to Tupac attacking Orlando Anderson just 3 hours prior. This theory was used to create the book Murder Rap, a 2011 book by a former LAPD cop called Greg Kading, who was responsible for removing any police involvement, being in the 1997 case of Biggie Smalls. The Southside Compton Crips had been supplying protection to New York artist Puff Daddy whenever he would come to Los Angeles.
The Compton police document to which we've been referring also states that Biggie's label Bad Boy Records employed Southside Crips gang members as security.
Puffy has denied this during interviews when asked if the Crips were ever hired, although he isn't lying when denying it, as technically he didn't actually hire them. Keefe D revealed that rather than paying them for security, Puffy would give them a large amount of tickets to the shows for them to have free entry and enjoy the show, also while providing protection. The LAPD cop Greg Kading, who made the book Murder Rap, has heavily involved Puffy in the Crips motive, with the book claiming that there was an outstanding $1 million bounty being over the heads of both Suge Knight and Tupac, being from Puffy to the Southside Compton Crips. Keefe D had went on the Art of Dialogue YouTube channel with an episode airing in September of 2021, where he claimed the $1 million bounty wasn't true.
Puffy, he approached you about pitting a hit on Tupac and Suge?
No. He never approached me about that. That's Greg Kading. That was a bunch of bullshit, all that.
And it had been cultivated from Keefe D asking Puffy's New York associate Eric Zip Martin for $10,000 worth of guns.
I'm gonna tell you what happened, dude. I told Zip we needed some guns, get us like $10,000. And everybody took that and took it to the moon, blew up, buffaloed us $1 million.
Murder Rap was formed into a documentary which showed the secret recordings of Keefe D while being questioned by the police, where Kading can be heard leading Keefe D into giving over answers, with Kading being the one who made the idea of $1 million bounty and Keefe D going along with it.
You tell him we'll do it for $1 million, and he's like, okay, I'll do it for $1 million. He agrees, you shake on it or something like that.
Keefe D lies twice during this part of the secret recording, where after Kading asks him about the $1 million bounty, Keefe D first claims that the Southside Crips had asked for the $1 million, but then claimed that it was Puff Daddy who had came up with it.
We wanted $1 million.
Who brought up the amount of $1 million?
He did.
Puffy did?
Yeah.
In the same Art of Dialogue interview uploaded onto YouTube, Keefe D claimed that Kading had worked the interview how he wanted to in order to create a Puffy motive to sell the book. This same theory was responsible for closing a $500 million lawsuit being against the LAPD for cop involvement in the death of Biggie Smalls, alleging that cops were behind Biggie's murder being tied into death row security.
Were LAPD officers involved in the murder of rap superstar Christopher Wallace, also known as Notorious B.I.G.? And if so, did the LAPD try to cover it up?
Greg Kading, as part of Murder Rap, claimed that Suge Knight had hired a blood gang member called Poochie in order to kill Biggie, with this information then dropping the $500 million lawsuit excluding the cop involvement. The Crip theory, coming from Keefe D's secret confession tape, claimed that after Tupac and Blood gang members had beaten down Orlando Anderson being in the MGM Grand lobby, the Crips went looking for them afterwards, with it coming down to members Terrence Brown, DeAndre Smith, Orlando Anderson and Keefe D being in a white Cadillac and finding Tupac Shakur and Suge Knight on the Las Vegas Strip. Keefe D, in the secret recording, which got him out of a 25-year prison sentence, claimed he handed a Glock to Orlando Anderson, who then carried out the shooting. Orlando Anderson was arrested during Compton raids, being shortly after Tupac's death in September of 1996, and he was handed over to the Las Vegas PD. He was released after Vegas PD didn't classify him as a suspect in the case. Documentary What Really Happened to Tupac and Biggie claimed that LAPD detective Russell Paul, who provided evidence of police involvement in the cases of Tupac and Biggie, from which the $500 million lawsuit was started, said MGM Grand surveillance video had showed Orlando Anderson being at the MGM Grand lobby bar during the time of the shooting. Orlando Anderson was murdered on May 29, 1998, being in a shootout in Compton. The 1997 episode of America's Most Wanted had been promoting the Crip theory, which at the time, Suge Knight seemed to have agreed with, until later on he had revealed more about the shooter's identity.
It was a rat on television saying he the one did the shooting, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, right? Why you think nobody been arrested if they said they the one killed Tupac?
I get hit in the head, I immediately look up. I look up, I see a mother with fear in his bitch ass eyes.
Suge Knight was filming for the TV documentary American Dream American Nightmare, being in 2014. He recalled the infamous shooting, where he claimed he looked the shooter directly in the eyes during the incident. During the filming, he claimed that he told Tupac that he might become a trophy after getting caught up in gangbanging activities, being after the fight took place in the MGM Grand.
In the streets, when you're known as the best, you become a trophy.
He had then later claimed that the shooter looked like they had got themselves a trophy, linking it back to his gangbanging comments made earlier on in the documentary.
He done got him a trophy, like he done that.
Suge Knight carried out an interview with TMZ, being in May of 2014, where he spoke on Keefe D publicly for the very first time. While on TMZ, he spoke on about there being a rat on television, claiming that they carried out the shooting, with this being in reference to Keefe D's involvement in Murder Rap, with Suge Knight tying it into Puffy due to the theory that Kading had manufactured.
Puffy can give him a mother star. Every rat in the world said he the one had him shot.
Suge Knight then claims that why was nobody arrested or charged with Tupac's murder if the Crips supposedly carried it out, with Keefe D then bragging about it on TV.
It was a rat on television saying he the one did the shooting, this happened, that happened, this happened, that happened, right? Why you think nobody been arrested if they said they the one killed Tupac?
This was the first time Suge Knight had hinted that the Southside Crips were not behind the murder of Tupac. In the same interview, he claimed that Jimmy Iovine, who was a part of Hollywood, being his distributor over at Interscope Records, had sent him to jail the first time around in 1996, which he later clarified on.
Jimmy Iovine sent me to prison and stole it from me.
If I asked you who killed Tupac, who would you say?
Orlando Anderson.
He wasn't a trigger man, was he? Because have anybody been arrested?
Who Shot Biggie and Tupac was a 2017 TV documentary which aired on Fox. Suge Knight was interviewed from prison due to his 2015 hit-and-run murder case in Compton. He had asked the hosts their opinion on who killed Tupac, with their response being Orlando Anderson.
If I asked you who who killed Tupac, who would you say?
Orlando Anderson is what I've been told.
Okay, have anybody been arrested? Because it's not one person in the car. He wasn't the driver and the trigger man, was he?
He once again then replied with, then why has nobody been arrested? Suge Knight in this interview revealed that there was more than one person in the car, and he once again put forward that if it was the Crips, then why was nobody arrested afterwards? He later claimed, sometimes if you solve the first case, then you will solve the second, with him insinuating that Tupac and Biggie's murders were connected.
Sometimes if you solve the first case, you might solve the second case. But that never happened, correct?
Yep.
He in this same interview for the very first time spoke on LAPD Rampart cops believed to be connected to his label. Suge was questioned on the cops brought up in the 2005 civil lawsuit by Biggie's family being for $500 million, with the cops being Rafael Perez, Kevin Gaines and David Mack. These were LAPD Rampart cops connected to the Rampart scandal, which was one of the worst police corruption cases in US history. The scandal started to uncover 2 weeks after the death of Biggie Smalls, with the follow-up death of Officer Kevin Gaines, who was found to have been connected to Death Row Records. Suge Knight and his former head of security, Reggie Wright Jr., were listed in the lawsuit along with including the cops. Reggie Wright Jr. was a former Compton cop whose father was the head of Compton's gang division. He became Death Row Records head of security, where he began in supplying police protection for the label. Having over 25 officers supplying security, LAPD Detective Russell Poole made claims that officers such as David Mack and Rafael Perez were providing services for the label. No paperwork has ever proved this, and Reggie Wright Jr. has always denied it. Suge Knight, when questioned about the cops during the documentary, claimed he had never met any of the cops and claimed it was Reggie Wright Jr. who knew them.
The police officer, David Mack.
Never worked for me. At all, never. I never had a conversation with none of those dudes. Never met those dudes, they never worked for me, they knew Reggie Wright. They didn't know me.
Suge Knight would later go on into further detail about the cop connection, being in his 2020 prison interview.
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? They said that, but that's not at all. They were trying to kill me too because they wanted the ownership of my company.
Suge Knight done an interview from prison in 2020 with Michael Douglas Carlin, who was the co-author to Russell Poole. The book Chaos Merchants, Murders of Tupac Shakur and Notorious B.I.G., written by Carlin and Russell Poole, uses the description of, quote, learn the truth that will cost Russell his life, unquote. Russell Poole died in the LA County Sheriff's Office after he had dropped dead of a supposed heart attack while going there to provide further evidence on the cases which would reopen them. The book claimed the LAPD were involved in the murders, with a Blood and Crips smokescreen being used as a cover, while the Hollywood elite and former city officials grew rich off the orchestrated deaths. The Suge Knight interview, which was released in November of 2020 and has now become his most revealing interview, Suge Knight claimed that he feels there was already a plan for something to happen to Tupac that night, and he went on to claim that Orlando Anderson was not the shooter.
The sad thing about it, Orlando wasn't even the shooter, you know? They said that, but that's not at all.
Suge Knight claimed, quote, they had said that, but it's not at all, unquote, with this being in response to the media's heavy push of the Orlando Anderson theory in order to create the idea of the Crips being behind the murder. By him saying not at all, it indicates that the Crips were not at all involved, with all maybe being the group of the Crips who the media claims were involved. Suge followed up by naming people who he believed were involved in the shooting, which he connected to the LAPD. In the interview, he claimed that he believes that the incident took place allegedly to take control over his company.
They were trying to kill me too because they wanted the ownership of my company.
The book Chaos Merchants by Russell Poole and Michael Douglas Carlin puts this theory forward, with Michael Douglas Carlin starring in the 2016 TV show Case Closed, with Carlin while on the TV show stating the theory of there being a coup d'etat played against Suge Knight from within his inner circle of influence to then generate money from his downfall.
Suge Knight was meant to be murdered the night Tupac was shot. If something's worth $500 million and you're tired of being harassed by the guy who runs it, Why not just kill him and take it from him?
In the 2020 prison interview, Suge Knight had claimed that his distributor Jimmy Iovine, along with his criminal defense attorney David Kenner, were getting paid $100,000 a month after the murder had taken place, while Suge Knight was dealing with incarceration.
They was giving David $100,000 a month, and David said he was giving Jimmy a kickback from $100,000 a month.
He claimed in an interview that an accounting firm who Jimmy Iovine had set him up with allegedly stole upward of $40 million after the murder had taken place.
I was in jail. I had caught the accounting firm who Jimmy introduced us to. They stole $30-40 million.
Tupac had fired both David Kenner along with Reggie Wright Jr. prior to going to Las Vegas, with Tupac firing David Kenner 2 weeks before the trip had taken place, with it being David Kenner who set up a fundraising event within Las Vegas, which Tupac had to travel to so he didn't go back to jail. This was after Kenner had moved one of Tupac's pending cases to Las Vegas, being from Los Angeles, with the judge ruling that it to be served through community service, being at a fundraiser for a Metro police officer, on which Tupac and Suge Knight were driving to on the night that they were shot. Reggie Wright Jr., along with Suge Knight's ex, Michelle, then became the head of operations while getting advice from David Kenner, with the 2016 TV show Case Closed, claiming that the company was signed over to Reggie Wright Jr., being in 1997.
After Tupac is killed and after Suge goes to jail, you have complete confusion until Suge signs over the record label to Reggie Wright Jr., and then all the chaos stops.
Biggie Smalls was murdered on March 9th, 1997 while in Los Angeles. LAPD detective Russell Poole provided evidence which claimed the corrupt cops were behind the murder, being tied into death row security.
Biggie was killed for no other reason than to advance this theory that the conspirators that had tried to take out Suge Knight were putting forward.
Russell Poole claimed the murders were highly orchestrated using radios and intercepting police frequencies, allowing the shooters to escape in both cases. Russell Poole's co-author Michael Douglas Carlin elaborates on this being on the TV show Case Closed, as he cites Tupac's bodyguard Michael Moore's claims being in a documentary Tupac Assassination, Conspiracy or Revenge, where he claims of hearing Gotham come over a radio while he was waiting at the fundraiser event, being on the night of the incident.
Michael Moore heard "Got 'em" come over the radio, so clearly there were spotters. There were people who were telling everybody that was in on it what was happening, kind of a play-by-play over the radio.
Carlin, being in an interview with Suge Knight, says that Russell got it right before he died, which Suge Knight goes on to agree with.
Russell got it right before he died.
Yeah.
In this video, we took a look into some of the times which Suge Knight has spoken on the shooter of Tupac Shakur, being over 26 years. He initially, no less than 6 months after it had taken place, had originally went along with the Crip theory, as seen in America's Most Wanted. By 2014, he had changed his stance and began with alluding that the Crips were not behind the murder. He then, in 2020, had given his most revealing interview yet, and he went on to claim that Orlando Anderson was not the shooter. Tupac's artist and close friend Yaki Gaddafi, who was in the car behind and had also seen the shooter, also claimed it was not Orlando Anderson. Gaddafi was found dead 2 months later with a bullet to the head while wearing a bulletproof vest. Let me know what your thoughts are on all this in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, smash the thumbs up button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell button so you can get all the future notifications for when I upload. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.